Hello, hello. This is Jonas. I'm here with the hosting crew of the Summer 2024 Microsolidarity Summer Camp in the EU that happened about 2 weeks ago at this point. And we're going to have a little conversation about what happened and what people learned from hosting that. And to begin with, maybe Alex, do you want to give us a quick rundown of the nuts and bolts? What happened um, at the summer camp?
Yeah, so we got about 52 people, if I remember correctly, together on a Thursday, if I remember correctly. It's been long enough that I've started to forget. So we got 52 people together on a Thursday to both Microsolidarity veterans, as well as new people, as well as people sort of in between, to sort of celebrate Microsolidarity a little bit, and then partially to get to know it over the course of about a week, while about 15 of the participants, I think, left after the weekend. So the weekend was more of a like getting to know, and then we had a full week for the people that wanted to stick around to maybe go a little bit deeper. What else do we want to say? I guess people came from all over Europe, some from even from the US, including Jesse here. We had a lot of sessions on very different topics, is my sense, with relating, like authentic relating type stuff and embodiment type stuff, very favored sort of on the weekend, and then more like, okay, let's go more into the depth of microsolidarity and like maybe some conflict resolution type stuff we'll get to later, sort of more in the second half. And we also tried to contribute to the place where we were. So we were in Kunst in der Natur in Austria, which is a beautiful sort of campground, but situated in a forest that contains lots and lots and lots of sculptures that have been sort of accumulating, in a sense, over the decades that they've been running this place, where they invite artists. And yeah, so you get stone sculptures and wooden sculptures and all kinds of things. Yeah, so we were sort of camping there, and we tried to contribute back. So we tried to patch up one of the huts, one of the clay huts that they had there, which was also more towards the second half of the middle and the second half of the retreat, the gathering. I feel like I've probably forgotten lots of important things, so I think I'm going to hand back to Jonas to ask those questions to elucidate that.
I can jump in to say something about the hosting crew and the support crew. So there was the four of us in the hosting crew, myself, Jesse, Miriam, and Alex. You can also wear your hands if you want, in case anybody's watching this. Yeah, we first started talking about the summer camp at the Microsolidarity winter retreat in February, myself, Miriam, and Alex, and then the four of us stepped forwards along with a few other people in the network initially to start ideating about what this could look like. And we've basically been meeting online for the last 4 months or so, once a week for an hour or so, to really think about what we want this to look like. And we've also been supported by our supporting crew, by Jonas, Jocelyn, and Rich, who are obviously in the overall hosting role of the network. And that's looked like particularly Jonas and Jocelyn joining us for nearly all of those 1 hour calls over the last 4 months. Kind of, yeah, very gracefully balancing between like kind of prompting us and guiding us and sharing like lessons learned and wisdom, and also like stepping back and giving us as the hosting team space to shape this for ourselves. And then Rich, you were very much more involved in the last month as well, just kind of being there to, again, be this sounding board, be a supporter. And then at the event itself, we all arrived a few days early to kind of start landing together. And then also very much kind of the supported crew supporting the hosting team throughout the event as well, in terms of being that extra sets of eyes and ears and sensors of like, hey, what's happening here and what might need to happen, and how can we shift things, and either kind of directly doing that yourselves or coming and sharing those reflections with the hosting crew. Yeah, maybe you guys actually already want to come in and say a bit more about your role as well.
I can say something on that. Something that I picked up on, they kind of expected, but actually really felt it, was the value of these two layers of support group, where last year when Jonas and I were facilitating it and hosting it with Rich's support, it was much more difficult for me to be more in touch on a relational level with participants. And so, because my lens was mostly focused upon facilitation and like, how do we facilitate the next piece based on what's going on in the room or in space, like what are the general dynamics and which pieces go where and how much to put in, how much not to put in. And it was just very interesting noticing, like on a hosting team, that it's really helpful to have people who could do what Jonas and I were doing, that Rich was doing last year, I think, which is more able to mingle and feel into the vibe and get more like data, what's actually happening, and be the just be able to have an eye on a different and an attention on a different level of awareness, I suppose, about what's going on and what's needed. Yeah, that was really interesting for me to notice.
Maybe I'll pick up there, Jocelyn, and add the intention behind rotating leadership, basically putting different people in front of the, like hosting the event from one year to the next, is about like giving lots of people opportunities to develop a reputation, to get that like just the high intensity learning moment of, wow, there's 50 something people looking at me and I've got a responsibility for, you know, to some degree, I've got some responsibility for what their experience is like. That, yeah, I think since the outset, we've had this approach of like, let's give lots of people the opportunity, because it's good learning for them, but it also creates a lot more resilience in the network and much less of a like single point of failure. Like if it was always me hosting events, then it would be a very me flavored network, which like would be interesting to me, but not so interesting for everyone else, I think. I think it gets a lot more different diversity of perspectives involved. And it gives me the feeling that there's like a deep bench, like there's just like a lot of talent. There's a lot of trust, probably more than talent, where people have had a chance to work together, and it's like, I can just anticipate upcoming activities in the network. It's like, oh, we've seen how you two work together, or like we can kind of dynamically respond to stuff with that pre-existing working relationship in place. And I think one of the dynamics that I'd like to talk about here is basically about at what rate do you hand over responsibility. Like I think quite rapid. It's hard to imagine going any faster. Like me and Nati leading the first event, and then Jocelyn and Jonas hosting the second one, and then this new crew hosting the third one. Like it's quite a rapid turnover, which is really good on the empowerment side, and also adds a particular kinds of stress. Yeah, there's certain points of the like certain points in the program where it's like, oh, if someone who'd been really experienced was hosting this, this would have gone differently. And I'm like, I'm not exactly sure where we should set the cursor on how fast to hand over, but I think that might be an interesting dynamic to explore together today.
Cool. I've also been taking notes as people were sharing. I wonder if Miriam and Jesse, you have anything to add on this layer of like overview, or like kind of looking at the whole thing, highlighting any particular areas that are missing so far.
I feel pretty complete with at this layer.
Cool.
I have one thing that's sort of nearly already there that maybe it's good to make explicit. There's like the sense of having these interlocking crews that support each other and like have different sort of sets of tasks that they do and so on. Like I felt like I could see some of that arising already there's like I think there's something interesting there.
And maybe just oh yeah,
I was just going to add another sort of, I think, crucial piece of information about these events. The main, like, organizing technology, I think there's kind of two pieces. One is what we call open space technology. So it's a co-created agenda where everyone shows up and just makes the agenda every day. They do the things they want to do. So rather than being curated or like that, there's a top-down sort of like, oh, this is a training program, or we're going to take you through this experience. And then two is what we call the pods. I want to rename them to the camp crews, but the home group, the small group that everyone visits once a day, which is your primary place for like getting some, like it's supposed to be your like guaranteed point of connection, where it's like you might be having struggles or tension in the camp, but at least there's this like one little crew that you can return to, that you have some some sense of home with, some sense of comfort, safety with. And I think those are the two kind of formal pieces of infrastructure, and the rest is held by like implicitness and memes and shared ways of doing things that are like hard to put your finger on.
Cool. And maybe one very important aspect that hasn't been mentioned yet, it was a cooking crew that consisted of Miriam, Diane, Pietro, and Jocelyn, and they kind of planned the meals and the recipes and the shopping beforehand, and then Chef Sarah, yes, thanks. Other Sarah that is not in the room right now, from the US. And yeah, they kind of one of them led each meal, and then other people helped by signing up for cooking or cleaning shifts. And yeah, the idea there being like kind of holding things together. It's not a like it's a camp. It's not a retreat where you get cooked for. But everyone's kind of helping out a bit. Yeah. I'm curious, there have been glimpses of this already in what's been shared, but what are the things that worked really well, like moments you remember that you're still feeling really good about, that you're celebrating? Maybe you can just sit with that for a moment, and when someone has something, just come off mute and share.
Yes. A number of things. One was the like having seen the evolution of how these gatherings have changed in vibe from the beginning. The first one in Belgium 2 years ago. There was something about the amount of music and creative, more like arts coming through. I think the venue really supported that, because there was a good spot, like a bit away from the main house, with this beautiful dome, and it just created a nice atmosphere for creative expression. There was place for people to move and dance, and there was just, I think, beforehand on the Telegram group, people were asking like, who's bringing instruments, and we had a few people who are really keen on jamming together, not just jam together, but like also bring this sense of how do we create this cohesion and do it in a way that is collaborative, and a way that really like amplifies the gifts in each other. There's some really beautiful moments, for example, of seeing Doro really shine. Like, she got some crew support for really finding a place to bring her voice where she was struggling a bit maybe at the beginning with it. And it was just really cool to see her with a proper like goddess crown that she created in the crafts corner earlier in the day, and just really shining in her glory, and everyone loved it. And it was a really lovely moment for me, seeing what can happen when we provide support to bring someone's gift to light. It almost looked like she'd just done it by herself, so you almost overlook that was like collective support. But that's the beauty of it. Like, it wasn't distracted by the fact that other people were being like, oh, I made that happen. It was just like Doro was just there being Doro. So I'm like, wow. And the second thing also around creativity was I think that something evolved in the kitchen dynamics, where the cooks, I think Chef started it by inviting people in the open space. She created an open space session for people to come in and while chopping sweet apples, saying sweet things about each other. another moment, like, I don't know if it was onions and chopping onions and talking about sad things or something, but just really bringing open space into the kitchen and transforming the kitchen experience into something we're also doing together. And it's not like a separate thing which you leave the festival, you leave the gathering for to do that job. It's like, this awesome opportunity for connection. And it really rolled into epic proportions, with Pietro also inviting people to bring, like, to support him on a quite an interesting experiment of blindfold chefing, which was deeply personally meaning for him, I think. Of course, there for others to take space.
I've always got 100 things to say. Some of the things I'm celebrating, I think it's like the general theme is like when I feel like people's development is getting unblocked, where it's like something has stagnated, or not even stagnated necessarily, but like where you see and feel this like, whew, wow, that person is really like taking off. Like Jocelyn, you mentioned Dora performing for the group, and it's like, wow, that's a very powerful expression. And you mentioned Pietro, like Pietro came with his like long-term friend Alex, and they by the end were just like, the two of them were like ecstatic, celebrating how their friendship had leveled up because they were just like for the first time surrounded by people that were communicating in a particular kind of way, and they're like, oh, we could do that. Like our friendship would be so much more satisfying if we could open up this dimension of connection. That was pretty epic. I really appreciated there was a point kind of halfway through where Jocelyn, you were like, oh, I'm having some wobbles about how this is going, and you like brought that to us and brought that to the wider group. And then it felt like you changed how you were showing up, and also the group kind of rearranged around you a little bit. And then suddenly it was like the next day you were a different person, or you were playing a different role in the system maybe. This like kind of, you're taking responsibility and being autonomous, and like, hey, I've got agency and I need to shape my experience, and also that the other participants are collaborating with you to like activate your autonomy. That was really sweet. And also there were 2 points where Jonas and Jonas basically read my mind during a like tense moment in the group. And that was awesome. It's like, we're reaching a level in our collaboration now where you can have this like tiny little glance and know that you know that I know that you know we both just process that moment in the same way, and therefore I can just like let go of it, and I don't have to get preoccupied with my story about what happened. I'm just like, okay, someone saw me, I can keep going, and that feels like just an incredibly precious resource that it's going to be fun to play with over the coming years. But there were loads more. Yeah, I'm enthusiastic to hear from other people too, like what things you're appreciating, because it seemed to me like there was a lot of people having a lot of really great times.
I can just come in and reflect a bit on the vibes. Yeah, I think a few days in, I was like lying in a hammock just on the edge of the forest, and just kind of hearing all of these noises just around of like laughter and chatter and silliness and music. And it was just this like really, really beautiful moment to just kind of breathe in and just feel that like everything's underway, people are arrived, connecting, developing senses of connection and belonging with one another. And I think there was a particularly beautiful moment on the Saturday where there was the sound bath, where there was about 5 people from the camp bringing in their various musical gifts, and about 20 plus people like just lying on the floor asleep or in some like deep meditative state. And it was just absolutely stunning to witness people at rest together. The fact that some people were just meeting a few days ago but could kind of go to that level of relaxation. I was just like stunned and moved by that. And I have a sense through many conversations and through feedback at the end as well that a lot of people have come away with a really profound experience in terms of their own connection with themselves, or witnessing different ways of being and relating to one another, and also coming away with collaborations or crews that they're going off and forming, which I don't have that much oversight of, but have a sense that that's happening from little bits that I've heard. So yeah, I'm really celebrating all of that. And I also want to celebrate and recognize the expertise in the network. So this on the last full day where we were like, now we need to address some tensions that are coming up, and kind of seeing the hosting crew, the supporter crew, and other people, Natty and Guy, also as an extended supporter crew, all coming together and working together to think like, okay, how are we going to work together to support this? And Nikki too. Yeah, thanks, Rich. And then yeah, Jocelyn and Nikki stepping in and holding a session on like exploring tensions, and just having those skills and resources just there within our network of Jocelyn and Nikki, you being able to just step in and take that was it was brilliant. And yeah, and I think also like Guy stepping in on the last day also to introduce the open space and really like show her gifts there as well. Yeah, I just feel excited by the amount of expertise and excellence in the network. And as you say, Rich, like it's the way the network is set up also gives opportunity for people to step into these different roles and kind of stretch themselves. That's me for now.
I can add one thing here. I also really felt the support of the wider hosting team, let's say, like the supporter crew, and also the hosting team being 4 people that met regularly, etc. And one more thing about all that I personally appreciated a lot, and I realized during camp how much value it has for me, is that we always facilitated in at least pairs, like in diets. So yeah, during the camp, I realized that it gives me just so much calmness, really knowing there's one other person who I've been talking through the whole session beforehand, that knows what the plan is, that can come in if something is missing or going wrong or whatever. But then also other people being present in the room and like paying attention and being there in case anything is needed. That's something that really helped me a lot, to not be nervous beforehand, etc. That's something I appreciated a lot. Yeah.
One thing that was just coming to mind for me that I thought was interesting was seeing the attitude of the hosts of the place, like the people who owned the farm we were on, evolving over the course of camp. Because at the beginning, it sometimes was feeling a little tense and weird, and like, what are the boundaries, and like, what are their expectations, and what are our expectations, and are those not lining up? But I think that they kind of got sucked into the like microsolidarity vortex a bit over the course of the event, which like, it's easy to imagine them participating a little bit in most events, but like as someone who's hosted a shitload of events, you just can't participate fully in most of them. It's like too much effort, but they seemed like they did actually get pretty invested towards the end, particularly Gabriel. And I just thought that was really cool to see. And by the end, it was like we had whatever the practices that we were using within the group that had come there for the event to build trust and belonging, like also seemed to be working with the people who were there, sort of holding the wider container for the whole thing to happen, which I think is kind of unusual and special.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that, Jesse. I had this insight hanging out with Gabrielle and with you actually when we were going to the mission together to like dump out the toilet waste. That it was the first time I sort of recognized like, oh wow, microsolidarity is about bringing country values to city people. And for me, like Gabriel and his family like really inhabit country values, which is like having a pride of place, being hospitable, like having a level of respect for each other, that has like no bullshit, that's like really down to earth, really grounded, yeah, very like convivial or caring, or like always having time to sit down and have a beer and a cigarette, or like that. There's like a whole bunch of qualities of like what it means to be a country person that like it's the way that I grew up basically. And it feels really nice. It's just like for me, it's just like such a comforting like human habitat to be around people with those values. Um, and it just made it was a kind of surprise to be like, oh, that's what we're doing with this network, is taking people who didn't grow up that way, or like hypermobile digital nomads, got friends in 36 different cities, like give them a taste of like what is it like to be in a real place where everyone knows each other and they take care of each other and there's like some mutual standards and like high trust. Like, ah, it was a really lovely surprise discovering that. Alex, I think you were about to say something and then I jumped the queue.
I was going to pile on to what Miriam and in some sense Sarah said. There was this like, yeah, I feel like a bit like a broken recorder saying it, but also like it just bears repeating, this like sense of safety as the facilitator or something. Like for me, a different experience was also this, like, I was like, how am I gonna introduce? I took up the opening session, the sort of the what is Microsolidarity, or what are we doing here? What is this event kind of bit of that? And just sitting down with you and Jonas and me being like, yeah, I've had a few ideas, and like I would maybe do it this way. And you like, I think you literally said like something, oh yeah, that's perfect. And I was like, what? Like, and I was like, you know, I was expecting to get a bunch of feedback and, you know, like really like zoom in on what the thing should be or something. And that, I don't know, yeah, that is another expression of the like, oh yeah, somehow we managed to get something going. And there was like this is like, for me, it's like, one way I phrase it is this like overflowing of capacity almost. Like there's so much safety that it overflows. There's so much belonging or something that it overflows. There's so much willingness to jump in or something that it overflows. That creates like this feeling of richness, this feeling of like abundance that then makes so many things possible. And that, I don't know, yeah. I have one more things related to this, is like, okay, I opened and I, you know, facilitated some sessions, whatever. And then I got sick, as you know, you get a cold. And so then when the stuff got a little bit tricky and there were like conflicts and whatever, and like normally I think I would have stressed a lot about like, oh no, now I need to, like, I'm sick, but I need to like somehow resolve the conflict. But I just felt 100% safe to be like, no, there's lots of people around that can handle this. And I trust that if I'm needed, I will be pulled in and I will somehow notice. And until then, I'm like, I'm okay being a vegetable on the floor. And yeah, it's an amazing experience.
That's so good to hear, Alex, that you were able to do that. That also speaks for like a certain amount of trust in you, and kind of back to the group. And what you just said made me think of a quote by Adrienne Maree Brown, which says, trust the people and they become trustworthy. And that's something that I like. There's no other place where I feel this so strongly, like in the Microsolidarity network, where it really works, where there's this kind of you get a credit of trust, and it's the quality of the trust is in a way that is like really encouraging you to do your best. And that's why usually there's no constructive feedback in the first iteration, or like when you came to us, it's like, yeah, cool, I would say it maybe a bit differently, but the way you are saying it is perfect. It's like that's gold. There's no corrections needed or something like that. And it's not because I think you made an effort because you were feeling our trust, and you were wanting to honor that somehow. And that's why you didn't just wing it. You prepared and you came to us saying, this is what I have. What do you think? And it was clear that you had put a lot of thought into it, and there was like really good. And yeah, it's super nice how that works. Yeah, I'm noticing the time. I'm wondering whether there's any more celebrations that want to be shared, or whether we should move on to some crunchy bits.
I would like to just come in with one last celebration and that is just kind of, yeah, jumping off this, what's just been discussed. But I think there was some really great trust within the hosting team. And actually, we only met Jessie for the first time face-to-face 2 days before the camp. We've just been collaborating online for the last months, and none of us have ever facilitated anything before together. And I think it's like having that weekly rhythm of being in our crew, meeting, having check-ins, basically doing the micro-solidarity things, I think enabled us to build that deeper level of connection. And so by the time we got to the camp, there was already, yeah, a lot of trust between us, which meant that when we were trying to negotiate things and at points under pressure, we were just able to kind of like flow with that. And when some like little tensions came up as well, then also able to speak openly about them. And that was really beautiful. I appreciate that a lot.
Sweet. What would you do differently next time? Maybe first, Rich and Jocelyn, maybe let's hear from the hosting team first before we fill the space with our ideas.
Okay, I'm going to come in with a few things. One is just a question. What is enabled and invited by calling it a summer camp? And how else might we want to like frame the event? Just so some people shared a bit of reflection of like, I'm not sure exactly what we're here to do together. Is it to have fun, or is it to work on projects? And I also remember that from last year's camp. And I also enjoyed the ambiguity. And I think a lot of people did as well, of like, ooh, let's see if we can have all of this in one package. So yeah, I'm definitely not like, oh, let's throw out the summer camp. But I'm curious about maybe there's another something that wants to emerge. Like Jocelyn and I were talking over dinner yesterday, like a community incubator or something like that, like and a multi-day event that's like very much like we are going to focus on peer-to-peer support on our community building, our community projects, etc., and have a bit less of the party vibe. So yeah, that's something, a question that I have. And I can also come in with something else in a bit, but maybe I'll step back in case somebody wants to respond to that or come in with another idea for how to do it differently.
This is not a response to that, so if anyone has a response to that, feel free to go for it. Okay. I talked about this with a number of you all during the event, but I just sort of wonder about the structure of having there be like a weekend and a week option, just because it creates a somewhat more disjointed experience for both the people coming for the weekend and the people coming for the week. And just like as an example, the people who are there for the week have like basically like at least 50% more entry exit facilitation than like they need to because they're actually not leaving in the middle, and stuff like that. And so I'm just curious what it might look like to schedule it differently and maybe make it 2 events. Or Rich, you had talked about the idea of having it be like a more intentionally like explicit inner circle beginning, and then people who are somewhat less deeply involved in that were coming later or something like that, instead of having it be somewhat of like a come whenever, leave whenever, free for all, which makes things a bit complicated from a like container holding perspective.
I actually want to say that it's highly related to what Sarah was just saying. It's just like, what does the event want to be? And there is a little bit of a chimera, like a little bit of a like two things that are woven into each other. Like it clearly, like it kind of both wants to be a festival of like, that's more like 3 days long, where people come together, celebrate belonging, microsolidarity, these kinds of things. And maybe people get a tiny taste, and like, you know, that's one. And then there's the other one, which is like the people that love microsolidarity come together to actually deepen ties of mutual support and start projects and wrestle with how to apply it, wrestle with what it really is, and so on. And it feels like it's kind of these two events in one. And yeah, I think I don't know who was, but someone said at the event, of like, oh yeah, maybe it's two of one, like maybe it's one event that one really wants to be two.
I'm just going to say that my bias is always like towards ambiguity, and I don't think that is necessarily strategic or the best thing, or like I'm not advocating for it in a sense of like, oh, we should definitely make it ambiguous, but just like I always head in that direction. Like when is this a place to have a good time or a place to work on your projects? I'm like, why are there two different categories? Like, just work on your projects while having a beer, and then hey, we're having a drum and bass lunchtime break because that's also fun. Like, I don't understand why, but from a strategy point of view, it might be a lot more straightforward for people if you say it's this, we do these things, come along if you want those things. And by having a more ambiguous purpose, we're certainly filtering in a particular set of people and filtering out the rest. I mean, the only reason that it's a summer camp is Natsi and me moved into a motorhome and spent a lot of time at campgrounds and realized like, oh, campgrounds are really interesting. And then one day I said, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a summer camp? And then people kind of like made that idea their own. And it happened a bunch of times. It's not like it hasn't come from some really strategic place. And what I'm hearing with these different ideas about changes to me is like, oh, what would happen if we really went to first principles and said, what do we actually want to achieve? Who do we want to invite to it? What's the structure that flows out of that? Like, and maybe what we've done so far is just surface like who are the most committed people that would be really interested in that design process. And then getting 5 people together or something for a couple of months and really like cooking up like what would be the most awesome thing that would be fun for us and accelerate or like support the growth of the things that we want to see in the world. Could be a really fun next step.
Let's do that.
Let's do that. Yeah. There's different levels, I guess, to my thoughts about how things could be done differently. At the more like low level practical tactical stuff, rather than like, oh, we could rethink the whole event design, is I think the one thing that to me felt like a missed opportunity was about the pods play such a crucial role in the event structure, but they were left up to chance in quite a significant way. And I would have wished, like, if it had been me hosting, I would have been really explicit about there are specific people in each pod who have got a lot more context than the average. Name them, let them know that they have a role to play. Maybe not that role is forced, but it's invited, or like you can say like, hey, Johnson, you've been around a lot. In the first pod meeting, you could talk about like, hey, Johnson could play a leadership role for this group. Do you want that or not? Or do you want to come to him for advice? Or, you know, like I think it could be some way of sort of like establishing a mandate for the people that have more history and context to host the pods or not, you know, as the group wants. And then more explicit, I almost want to use the word strict or like top down, more directed. What should the pods do each day? So there could be a day about getting in touch with what you want. This was another suggestion I talked to Johnson yesterday. Just really train that muscle of what do you want? Like, what do you want to see here? What do you want? Like, it's kind of irrelevant what we say the purpose is. It's like, what desires are people showing up with and how much agency and self-efficacy do they feel to be able to access those and do stuff about it? And then you could have a day which is about like tensions or like what's disappointing you, or what do you think, like how could we support you to have a more satisfying time tomorrow? You know, like I think there's sort of like much more opinionated design questions that the hosting team could drop in like acupuncture points into the pods and yeah, play a more sophisticated kind of steering role rather than the neutral sort of like, oh, we're just holding the space and things happen and we hope they're going well. So that's the main change that I'd recommend. And then the other thing that felt like maybe it was an attempt that didn't fully land would be just something around being more proactive about seeking tension early and frequently, and normalizing the process of, I don't feel so good about how this is going. I named it in a self-responsible way. I called in the support that I needed to be able to change it. I changed and the group changed and we made some kind of creative response. And the group is learning together and we're getting better and better because people are being courageous with the things that are not working so well for them. I think if we can get really good at that, like that to me is one of the essential moves, or what makes a really high trust, harmonious group, is that people get pissed off constructively and it becomes this like fruitful, like, oh great, you brought it to us in time before it exploded into something that was like too hot to handle.
Yeah, if I can, I will riff off of that for just a second. Because it was mentioned a few times, like kind of offhand, like, ah, yeah, and then some tensions happened, and what happened was that there wasn't a minor incident in one of the open space sessions, where the person that was directly involved was kind of supported right afterwards, and like it in the end turned out wasn't such a big deal for them, but this event kind of sparked a bunch of other tensions that had been kind of under the surface to come up. And in the session that Jocelyn and Nikki hosted, the for digesting tensions, it was very clear that, oh, there was all these other things in the field that somehow didn't find a way to be expressed, and now they're all kind of being inflamed, and they don't have much to do at all with the thing that we actually thought we were talking about. And yeah, it's just like if there's no channel to address things head on, then it will just come out the side at some point, and like in a messy way. And that, yeah, it's kind of learned that again. And I think a slightly related point is there was a point when people were leaving and we were forming the kind of second half of the week again, where a bunch of us mentioned like, cool, now that we all have arrived and feel belonging and are settled, what are we going to do with it? And I think that took made it even harder for people to say, actually, I don't feel so arrived yet. I don't, like, I know I've been here for 4 days, but there's these things that are not right for me, or like I have a proposal to change something, and it kind of created an atmosphere of like, or it can easily create a dynamic of if you don't feel good by now, then something's wrong with you. And yeah, I think it's just a minor fuck up that can have a big implication for some people. And I don't think the event was worse because of that, but I think it could have like made for a smoother experience somehow. Or
I think I want to come in here and be like, if it was a tension that I was holding, definitely, of hearing from most people of like, oh, we want to have open space, we want to not force people to come into the congregation too much, we want to give them like, and I noticed like, but the things that we're discussing now, the way I would address them is actually at the congregation level, sort of giving the group enough time to see itself. And I felt like that was actually that came a little bit short. Like people were very like focused on having short sessions at the congregation level. It was the sense. I felt like a few people said something in that direction. And I was actually like, one learning for me is like, in some way I would have wanted more. And if I were to run again, I would be tempted to listen more to my own intuition. That was, it feels like was kind of, yeah, kind of matches with the sort of the points that were just raised. It was like, yeah, oh, these are things that I feel like there needs to be time and space for. And I felt like that was a little bit missing. And I'm noticing as I'm saying this, like, but it has an assumption that, oh, this is at the congregation level, So at the big group level of everyone there, and like, maybe there's some way of surfacing this somehow in some other way. Maybe there is a technique, but I think it would still involve some sort of facilitation, right? It would still involve some sort of structure that you put into the group of like, yeah, allowing this to surface.
I can definitely own that. Any perceived resistance you have to doing process with the whole group, I definitely own a lot of that resistance. Like a lot of that comes from me. And that's just from experience of, and I learned how to do this stuff in the Inspiral gatherings. And when Nati and I took over and ran one of the gatherings, there was like 90 people or something. And we made the very audacious call that we're not going to do so much full group stuff. And it was kind of like a shock to the community because there was so much, we're used to doing so much stuff with the whole group. And it's, at my perspective was basically that people were using the full group's attention to do stuff that would actually be more skillfully done with like 4 or 5 people. And it's just like incredibly expensive in terms of people's attention, and like inefficient in deploying what we could be getting done. You know, you could be, yeah, some people over there doing a yoga thing, and some people over there doing a music thing, and some people over there nerding out about some governance question. But no, we're going to sit here with everyone focused on this topic, and it kind of like exaggerates the importance of each dynamic. So I've definitely got this like strong bias. Again, it's like the ambiguity thing. It doesn't mean it's the right move. It's just like the thing that I'm showing up with, and I'd be curious to like try doing it a different way. But the other side of that, and this is something that I feel like Jocelyn's been holding really, really strongly last at the camp and then in the debrief since then, is like the kind of tension that we're talking about and the kind of response that we're talking about. A lot of it comes down to personal responsibility versus seeking an external authority to solve problems for you. Maybe do you want to speak to that a little bit, Justin, rather than me try and like recapitulate what you've already said?
Yeah. Yeah. When on this topic of like doing more group time to process stuff or to address, I don't know, themes that come up, I think my curiosity is more towards how can we rather encourage one another to support one another's voice when we have a sense of something's not quite right for me. Like, how do we support that person or that group of people? And I think that's something where particularly, for example, my experience at the camp, what I saw in Dora was like, okay, she had a small group of people who were like, oh, there's something there, you're a bit like, something's not quite right for you, what's going on, let's hear it, let's hear what your concerns are about addressing it, and like, how can we in a small group level initiate you to find that space without putting ourselves like in the way of your own empowerment to actualize what you need. Like, we'll support you, but there's something about like around this topic of how do we give each other agency, which I'm really curious about. Like, does agency have to feel like a super hyper individualistic thing where you've just got to like elbow your way into the crowd to be seen? Like, that's not what I hope to be emulating. But the opposite is, one person's got an upset and suddenly the whole crowd has to listen to them, or the whole crowd has to speak on their behalf to make something change, and we have to advocate for a huge big cause. Where it's like, wow, let's actually not lose sight of the fact that this person may be possibly having like a growth experience here if we give them the space to actually name it themselves, but not feel like they're alone in naming it by themselves. I think that can be really powerful, and also builds trust in someone's capacity to realize like, oh, I can actually be heard here, and something can change when I step up, which is more powerful than, oh, when I step up other people will speak for me, and that's good. It's a different thing. Yeah, I'm still working on how to articulate it, and I imagine it could come across to some people as like, yeah, not a familiar thing, or maybe, yeah, I don't know what it sounds like, but I feel there's some like, what's the Microsolidarity way of supporting agency in each other? And I've witnessed it. I think some people are still unfamiliar, and therefore not super, like, people didn't go for that as much as they could have possibly. I find it scary as well. Like when I like expressed my wish for having something change slightly, and wanting to be more recognized for the experience that I bring, and like wanting to be invited into conversations that I could share my experience about microsolidarity. It was scary, but because I had spoken about it with Jonas and Rich before, and they were like, I think you're onto something. It's like, you could ask for that. And when I said it, I realized people were like, oh, why don't you do a Q&A session tomorrow? And I felt that there was like support for it. It felt like I could bring it in a way that was, people wanted to come and help me out and partner with me in helping me get what I needed. And yet it wasn't like Jonas and Rich speaking on my behalf about what I needed, like, which would have taken away my own transformational experience of speaking in front of a group and being like, I need this thing. Yeah.
I wonder whether there's a thing of like making it more explicit in the different scales of addressing attention. And what I definitely sense is that there is a structure missing to bring things to the whole group. And I don't think it has to take a lot more time when it's framed as there is a space every morning for proposals, and we're going to do a consent-based decision-making thing of, if we want to change something about how the whole camp runs, you can object on a kind of in a principled way. Like, it's not a, I have a better idea, but if you feel like it will harm the thing we're trying to do here, then you can object, and you have to justify it if you're objecting to someone's proposal. And also, you can't show up and complain. You need to bring a constructive idea for how to change something. And it's a bit risky, maybe, like you're inviting a whole like load of discussion. But yeah, Justin just saying in the chat, activating crews more. I feel like one way to have the clarity to bring a really good proposal that's serving the whole is to have it pre-digested together, and to address something in the small group, in the crew, or maybe with another friend that you already know, and be like, hey, this is really bugging me. Can you help me find a way to bring it to the group that will help everyone, instead of that will close the space and put up barriers, and that will lead to like backlash or a rebellion against my proposal. So yeah, but that's a very like kind of tricky thing to do, I feel, but I'm curious about playing with that in the future. We have 10 more minutes, and I wonder whether there's more things we would do differently next time. I have one last question of, what did you learn personally, which I think is interesting in terms of making the growth visible that has been happening here. So that's interesting. Invite that, and otherwise maybe there's more celebrations or changes for the future.
Can I come in
things?
with one more lesson from my side, which I think is probably also like reflects my own growth as one of the co-hosts. I think that I'm really like proud and celebrating how we as the wider crews responded when this tension came up in this workshop, which, as you said, was kind of connected with some other tensions that were under the surface. And I think we just did a really great job of like supporting each other to respond and to hold our shared container. And I also think in hindsight, it also could have been held more lightly. So I was the person who opened the open space that day, and was just quite like serious of, hey, this thing's happened, and some people are feeling upset, feeling challenged. And I think I was really wanting to do justice to giving space for people's feelings in that moment. And there was also some people who had absolutely no idea what was happening and were maybe more alarmed than they needed to be, or and also the fact that actually addressing tension is exactly the thing that we want to learn how to do better in communities. And so actually it was whilst not not taking people's feelings seriously and what happened. It was also a really, really important moment for us as a group to kind of travel through this tension and see what it's like to navigate that. So yeah, I think holding it a bit more lightly and kind of making visible that now we're going to do the exact thing we're here to do. Let's go for it. Let's see what happens. So yeah, next time, holding the gravity with also some lightness.
Maybe expectation setting that we expect tensions to come up. Like we could have emphasized that a little bit more maybe. And like, I think some people were a little bit surprised in a way that maybe we from the hosting team or from the supporter group were not, right? We had maybe more of an idea of what would happen, and sort of maybe setting that expectation might be helpful for people.
I think that there's two things that I learned that I have work to do to get to the end of. Yeah, one thing is about tension and conflict, and like I think we're nearly ready to write a very prescriptive handbook of like, this is what to do if you feel discomfort, and this is how to escalate the process from like a mild unease to like, no, this is really serious, and like this is how to call in the kind of support you need, and this is the microsolidarity way of handling this. Like Guy described this really well in our last meeting, that like each of us actually have been enrolled into a process of like, oh, I'm having a bad feeling, I'm going to get to the bottom of what that says about what I need, and I'm going to activate some kind of like proactive and creative and pro-social way of getting those needs met that like brings in the appropriate level of support from the right people at the right time. Like there's a whole flow around that, which I think is like essential that we have to articulate. And then similar, but in a different field, is something about expectations that you're saying, Alex. Like, how do I explain this briefly? There's this thing in Integral, which they call the pre-trans fallacy, which is like it's hard to when you're first meeting someone or you're not really familiar with the context. It's hard to and you haven't really understood exactly what they think on a particular topic. Let's say sexism. When you first hear the way that they're talking about sexism, you don't know if like the pre-trans fallacy is like, you can have someone who's actually very advanced and has thought about this a lot and has gone very deep into study and practice and come up with a position on sexism which is really highly nuanced, which looks the same at a first glance as someone who's never thought of it before. They're sort of like, before they're in the pre-stage, they haven't given any thought to sexism. They're just kind of like speaking off the cuff. At a first glance, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between those two states. And I think we've got people in the network who have actually given like sexism, patriarchy, queerness, like a bunch of incendiary polarizing topics that a bunch of us have given a lot of thought to and come to positions that are quite nuanced and careful, and don't readily fall onto like, oh, which side of the line are you on? Where do you stand on this polarized topic? And that we could be a bit more explicit about like, so for example, there was a question about could this space be more welcoming of queer people? And like, absolutely yes, obviously yes, like there's always going to be opportunities to make a space more welcoming of queer people. But the question that I was left with was like, can you make a space more welcoming of queer people and make it more welcoming of conservative religious people? Like, that turns out to be quite a challenge. And it, to me, that's the challenge I've signed up for, is like, can we design spaces that really support pluralism and that are inclusive in like quite an uncomfortable way? And yeah, I think it takes a lot more than just the last couple of minutes wrapping up, to be able to really articulate that with a depth of clarity and respect for all the different positions. And I sort of feel like I want to do some work. I don't know where or with who, but a bunch of us just articulate like, hey, there are some polarized topics. There is a culture war going on. We do actually have a position in it, and it's not what you think. And what if you think it's not what you think? It's something more surprising than that. And to let people know before they arrive, you're not going to get what you expect here. It's going to be something else, and come if you're up for that.
All right, I'll share personal growth edge of just some super chill shit to go on top of that. I sort of went into the whole experience feeling kind of like awed by the just sort of experience level in facilitation wise of everyone, and I still somewhat feel that way. But there was sort of an undercurrent for me of like, and therefore I have nothing to contribute on the facilitation front, whether that be the actual doing it or just the idea of how it's going to be done. And I guess for context, in case someone's watching this, I was doing logistics, not facilitation. And over the course of the event, I sort of realized that I like did have opinions about things and that they were actually potentially useful. And so yeah, that was sort of an empowering realization. Be like, okay, even if I'm less experienced than all these other people who seem really, really experienced, I still like have something to contribute.
Oh, these are the people who seem really experienced. That's an important word here.
I was gonna make a joke. It's like actually I am really experienced. That was my whole shindig during the camp. Fun if you were there. That makes sense. I guess that's my learning edge. That's why I wanted to jump in, because I think my learning edge was and growth edge and like insight was just where it's like everyone has equal, totally equal right to belonging. I think which reflected this back to me as I was like chewing on it, and yet there are differentials in like how much context people have in a gathering or around a theme, and it's been spoken to a bit, but just like I think I've in from a more like wanting everyone to be equal and coming out of this like flat hierarchy dream, it's like, oh no, it shouldn't be seen to be, or like to be putting people like on a pedestal for anything, or like that's not okay, everyone should have like equal voice. And yet there are ways in which actually acknowledging that some voices have more context is actually helpful for a group field to know like what's a reliable or concrete or like well thought through idea or principle. And I think it helps with a degree of like trust building, like, okay, I don't have to figure everything out here. Like there's some people who've like got a few years of experience. Let me like latch on to that snowball and rather than have to reinvent the wheel on every idea, on every like way of doing things. And I think also helps people to also go with their own growth edge as well and find their niche. When we're talking about successional leadership, it's like, oh, okay, that person's got rank around context and experience less than me. Maybe if I can like hang out with them, like I know that that's a source of mentorship for me. And I think there's something in me wanting to be like, maybe it's like okay to be saying a bit more like the experience that I've built up, while acknowledging that I'm there and I'm also still growing. It's there's something really really clarified there for me around actually acknowledging the gifts that we all do have and like being vocal about, actually I'm good at that, come ask me a question about it. And I would really like to continue also supporting others around me to like tell me like what can you teach me, what are you good at, like where do you have experience and context that would be beneficial for all of us. So that was cool.
Okay. Any last nuggets of wisdom?
So I actually feel like I sort of learned the thing I came in to learn with, which was a kind of I was hoping to sort of experience. I guess it's weird. It's like a learning, but also it's kind of an experience I was hoping for. And it's just like, oh, I can show up to an event, to the facilitation, to the hosting, to the organizing of it. I can show up in a way that feels good to me and that I'm excited about, and that's enough. And that was just a very special experience. Just like, oh wow, I'm not gonna overextend or like in very minimal ways or whatever. I'm not gonna overextend and yeah, I'll show up in the way that feels good to me, and that was great. I'm really grateful for that.
I wanna add one thing to that, Alex. Forgive me. I think not being overextended gives you access to a level of sophistication in your facilitation, which is like, it's almost superhuman. It's like you're actually plugged into the group field. You're not preoccupied with like, oh, I'm juggling so many balls. Like I saw it in the closing session where I think what had happened, we haven't debriefed this, but I think what happened was you had an idea designed for how the closing session should go. And then as it started happening, things went on a lot longer than you originally planned. And in my experience, you had this like extremely graceful way of saying to the group, like, oh, this has gone a bit differently than how I intended. We're now going to change plans on the fly and I'm going to hand to Sarah. And it was just like watching some very experienced improvisation going just like so fluid because you were responsive to what was going on instead of like being so phonetically committed to your plan that you had to like crunch 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 crunch. So that was just like a really a joy to watch, and I'm glad you had the experience that just being yourself is enough.
Okay. Let's let that be a mic drop moment. And another Microsolidarity meme, and with a mic drop. No, and with more energy than you arrived with. Like, I didn't read the full message before reading it out loud. That's also a Microsolidarity meme. Do mic drops. Cool. Thanks for the debrief. And I'll stop the recording there.